The 1965 India-Pakistan War, script picture, this to brand new nations, barely 18 years old, locked in a deadly embrace over a piece of land that neither could truly call their own. What started as a covert operation would spiral into one of the most brutal conflicts in South Asian history, reshaping the entire region forever. This is the story of how a failed infiltration mission triggered a war that brought the world to the brink of a nuclear standoff. The year was 1947, and the British Empire's crown jewel was finally slipping from their grasp. After 2 centuries of colonial rule, the Indian subcontinent was about to be carved up like a birthday cake, but nobody was celebrating. The partition created 2 nations from one India, envisioned as a secular state despite its Hindu majority, and Pakistan, designed as a sanctuary for the subcontinent's Muslims. But here's the thing about drawing lines on a map while sitting in London, you tend to ignore the messy reality of who actually lives where. The borders were drawn with all the care of a drunk person trying to thread a needle. Entire communities found themselves on the wrong side of lines they'd never asked for, in countries they'd never chosen. What followed was nothing short of catastrophic. Imagine trying to relocate the entire population of the United Kingdom, twice. That's roughly what happened as millions of people packed their lives into whatever they could carry and began one of history's largest mass migrations. Hindus and Sikhs fled to India, whilst Muslims made the dangerous journey to Pakistan. The roads became rivers of desperation. Families were torn apart. Communities that had coexisted for centuries suddenly turned against each other. The violence was unimaginable. Over 1 million souls lost their lives in the chaos, their blood staining the very foundation of these newborn nations. But perhaps the most poisonous legacy of partition was the festering wound left by Kashmir. Here was a princely state with a Muslim majority, but ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh. When push came to shove, Singh chose to join India and Pakistan. Well, Pakistan wasn't having any of it. Think about it from Pakistan's perspective. They'd just been created as a homeland for Muslims. And here was a region full of Muslims being handed over to India. It was like being promised a piece of cake and watching someone else eat it right in front of you. The result, the First Kashmir War erupted almost immediately, running from 1947 to 1948. It was a bloody preview of what was to come, ending only with a unmediated ceasefire that essentially drew a line down the middle and said, "You lot stay on your side, you stay on yours." But that line, called the line of control, solved absolutely nothing. Both nations still claimed the entire region, and the United Nations kept promising a referendum that never materialized. It was like having 2 children fighting over a toy and the parents saying, "We'll sort this out later," except later never came. Fast forward to the mid-1960s, and both nations were feeling the pressure. In Pakistan, President Ayub Khan, who'd seized power in a military coup, was facing growing dissent. Nothing unites a fractured nation quite like a common enemy, and Kashmir was the perfect rallying cry. Meanwhile, in India, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri was dealing with his own challenges. The Chinese had given India a proper thrashing in 1962, and the nation was still smarting from that humiliation. Shastri knew he couldn't afford to look weak again, especially not to Pakistan. The Cold War added another layer of complexity to this already volatile situation. Pakistan had cozied up to the Americans, receiving shiny new weapons and military aid through various defense agreements. India, feeling abandoned after the Chinese invasion, had turned to the Soviets for support. Suddenly, what should have been a regional dispute had become a proxy battleground for the world's superpowers. Every tank, every aircraft, every bullet fired carried the stamp of either Washington or Moscow. The powder keg finally exploded in August 1965 with something called Operation Gibraltar. Pakistan's brilliant plan: infiltrate. Infiltrate Kashmir with specially trained guerrillas who would blend in with the locals and spark a massive uprising against Indian rule. They genuinely believed the Kashmiri people would rise up en masse and demand to join Pakistan. There was just one tiny problem with this masterpiece of military strategy. It was complete rubbish. The Kashmiris didn't rise up. The guerrillas, trained to be invisible, stuck out like sore thumbs. Indian forces spotted them almost immediately and began hunting them down across the mountainous terrain. All through August, fierce battles raged as India systematically dismantled Pakistan's covert operation. But Pakistan wasn't about to back down quietly. On September 1st, they launched Operation Grand Slam, a massive offensive aimed at capturing the crucial Aknur Bridge. This bridge was India's lifeline to the Kashmir Valley, and Pakistan knew that severing it would cripple Indian operations in the region. Initially, the plan worked brilliantly. Pakistani forces advanced rapidly, and for a moment, it looked like they might actually pull it off. But India wasn't about to let that happen. Here's where things get really interesting. Instead of just defending the bridge, India decided to open an entirely new front. They launched a massive attack towards Lahore, Pakistan's second largest city. Imagine Pakistan as shock when Indian tanks suddenly appeared on the outskirts of one of their most important cities. The psychological impact was enormous. Pakistan had to frantically divert troops from their Kashmir offensive to defend Lahore. EF, EC, TIV, ELY. Neutering Operation Grand Slam before it could succeed. What followed was 17 days of absolute chaos. Both sides threw everything they had at each other. Infantry battled in scorching deserts and freezing mountains. Artillery barrages lit up the night sky like deadly fireworks displays. Tank battles raged across the Punjab plains with a ferocity that had been seen since World War II. The conditions were absolutely hellish. Soldiers fought in temperatures that could melt steel in Rajasthan's desert, whilst their comrades froze in Kashmir's mountain pass. Supply lines stretched thin as both armies pushed their limits. One of the war's most decisive moments came at a place called Asalutar, a small village in Punjab that would witness one of the largest tank battles in history. Pakistani forces, confident in their American-supplied M48 Patton tanks, launched what they believed would be a knockout punch. But the Indians had prepared a trap. Using the terrain to their advantage, they positioned their older but reliable Centurion and Sherman tanks in defensive positions and waited. When the Pakistani armor charged forward, they ran straight into a killing field. The battle raged for 3 days. Tank crews fought in sweltering heat inside metal coffins, knowing that one well-placed shot could turn their vehicle into a blazing tomb. When the smoke cleared, 28 Pakistani tanks lay destroyed for the loss of just one Indian tank. The Indians were so impressed with their victory that they nicknamed the battlefield the Patton Graveyard. It was a devastating blow to Pakistani morale and marked a turning point in the war. Meanwhile, in the air, pilots engaged in deadly dogfights across the subcontinental skies. Pakistan's more modern aircraft gave them a slight edge, but India's superior numbers began to tell as the war dragged on. Every day brought new aerial duels as fighter pilots pushed their machines and themselves to the absolute limit. Even the seas weren't safe. On September 7th, Pakistan launched Operation Dwarka, a naval assault aimed at destroying India's radar installations and demoralizing the population. Pakistani destroyers crept through the darkness of the Arabian Sea, their guns trained on the Indian coast. The attack achieved some success, But it also demonstrated the limited scope for naval operations in this primarily land-based conflict. The Indian Navy responded by ramping up patrols and coastal defenses, ensuring that Pakistan couldn't repeat such operations. Interestingly, whilst the Western Front erupted in violence, the Eastern Front remained relatively quiet. East Pakistan, which would later become Bangladesh, saw only minor skirmishes. Indian generals openly questioned why they should attack East Pakistanis, who already despised their Western counterparts. As the war raged on, the international community grew increasingly nervous. The last thing anyone wanted was for this regional conflict to spiral into something much larger. Both the Americans and Soviets, despite backing opposite sides, found themselves in the unusual position of wanting the same thing: an end to the fighting. The United Nations began passing resolution after resolution, each one more urgent than the last, demanding a ceasefire. The Security Council, usually paralyzed by Cold War divisions, managed to find common ground in their desire to prevent South Asia from exploding. By late September, both nations were running on empty. Ammunition stocks were dwindling, casualties were mounting, and the economic cost was becoming unbearable. The realization began to dawn that neither side could achieve a decisive victory without risking complete destruction. On September 23, 1965, the guns finally fell silent. A UN-mandated ceasefire came into effect, though it felt less like peace and more like an exhausted pause in an ongoing fight. The aftermath was sobering. India had lost approximately 3,000 soldiers, whilst Pakistan's casualties numbered around 30. Hundreds of tanks and aircraft lay destroyed across the battlefield, representing millions of dollars in wasted resources that both young nations could ill afford. More importantly, the war had resolved precisely nothing. Kashmir remained divided, the line of control unchanged, and the fundamental dispute as bitter as ever. If anything, the conflict had only deepened the mutual mistrust and hostility between the two nations. The Tashkent Agreement, signed in January 1966 under Soviet mediation, required both countries to withdraw to pre-war positions and restore normal diplomatic relations. On paper, it looked like a reasonable solution. In reality, it was merely a band-aid on a wound that refused to heal. Closing. So, there you have it. 17 days that shook South Asia and achieved absolutely nothing except death, destruction, and deeper divisions. The 1965 war stands as a perfect example of how quickly regional tensions can explode into full-scale conflict, and how difficult it is to resolve disputes that are rooted in national identity and pride. The lessons from this conflict remain painfully relevant today. When nations allow nationalism and historical grievances to override common sense, everyone loses. The real tragedy isn't just the lives lost in 1965, but the decades of mistrust and conflict that followed, preventing two nations with so much in common from building a peaceful future together. What did you think of this incredible story? Have you heard of the 1965 war before? Let me know in the comments below. And do you and forget to smash that subscribe button? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most overlooked conflicts, there's so much more to explore in South Asian history, and I'd love to take you on that journey. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember that behind every war statistic is a human story waiting to be told. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!